Obama and domestic terrorist Bill Ayers friends. They've worked together for years, but Obama tries to hide it. Why? Obama launched his political career in Ayers' living room. Ayers and Obama ran a radical education foundation together. They wrote the foundation's bylaws together. Obama was the foundation's first chairman. Reports say they distributed more than $100 million to ideological allies with no discernible improvement in education. When their relationship became an issue, Obama just responded, "This is a guy who lives in my neighborhood." That's it? We know Bill Ayers ran the violent left-wing activist group called Weather Underground. We know Ayers' wife was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. We know they bombed the Capitol, the Pentagon, a judge's home. We know Ayers said, "I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough." But Obama's friendship with terrorist Ayers isn't the issue. The issue is Barack Obama's judgment and candor. When Obama just says, "This is a guy who lives in my neighborhood," Americans say, "Where's the truth, Barack?"
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, all across the world, wherever you are or may be. This is Kari Ilonummi, your host with NoSpinNewsSource.com, coming at you with your 1080p high definition monthly report for April 3rd, 2012. What an explosive and exciting show we have for you today. As you can see by the beginning of the introduction, the video you just saw. And that's only the beginning, folks. That's right. Well, you know, as many friends and people out there in society knows, that eventually the point was going to come that Kari would ramble so many views that I would either completely discredit myself regarding the British Empire and Obama hanging off the butt of the Queen, and so on and so forth, that, well, you know, I mentioned, by no later than what would be summertime of 2012, I would reach a point in which would be my make or break moment. Well, I feel that I've reached it, folks. We have footage for you today in which not just my commentary, my interpretations of deep philosophical issues or reading through the law books, but today I have none other than Obama himself putting the icing on my cake. As today you will find out where the president's loyalty really lies. Is it to you and the interest of the nation state, which is what he put an oath on? He swore upon an oath over the Constitution to protect the interest of the nation state? Or is it to the British Empire and the Queen? Well, you have to wait for that video. But today, like I mentioned, is the make or break. So a whole bunch of liberals are going to find themselves not knowing what to say. But you won't have a debate after today's show. So, moving onward, we're going to start reading some articles here. We have Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov rejects the Friends of Syria deadlines and denounces a strike against Iran for it would violate international law. And that's true. It would. Former longtime CIA officer Paul Pillar denounces the war drive and labels the huge gap between what would be the U.S. national interest and the Netanyahu government's push to strike Iran preemptively. In Italy, we have a Franklin Delano Roosevelt-style Glass-Steagall Act reform is becoming very popular amongst the citizenry. And one senator had his office raided yesterday morning because of that. So it was more of a, not based upon a real probable cause, but more of a fishing expedition, unquote, as it was labeled, as the powers that be and big banks are getting rather scared as the citizenry are waking up and saying, hey, it's time for Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall. That's what the world wants. That's what the world needs. Now we also have Obama signing this anti-protest bill, making it illegal and a felony charge, including imprisonment, for doing what our Constitution protects, which is a freedom of speech. And at this point in the show, we're going to show you directly Judge Napolitano's interpretation of this act and exactly what this means for you, the citizen of the United States.
Well, it's a bill that has received very little attention but may make free speech a felony and seriously restrict your right to political protest. Just signed into law by the president, H.R. 347 gives federal agents sweeping powers to arrest and bring felony charges against citizens engaged in protests where the Secret Service is present. Joining us now with more, Fox News senior judicial analyst, good friend, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, the thing that jumps out off the page, felony?
Yeah, felony means more than a year in jail. This is not like a traffic ticket. For standing and protesting, the type of thing that for 230 years Americans took for granted because it was protected by the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, has actually been abridged by legislation the president signed last Thursday, supported overwhelmingly by both parties, with very, very little public debate and very little debate in Congress. Basically allows Secret Service agents to decide where there are no free speech zones, not speech zones, no free speech zones. And anybody by the Secret Service protected by the Secret Service, can ask those agents to ban protests wherever they are. So I can think of 3 violations: speech violations, association violations, the right to petition the government for a redress of your grievances. What good is free speech if the people in the government are so far away from you that they can't hear you?
Judge, what about keeping our elected officials safe?
Keeping our elected officials safe is entirely different from insulating them from protest. The fact that the president is going to a hotel up the block should not bar you from standing across the street with a sign or with a bullhorn saying what you think about the president's policies. That is not a threat to him, and it is a part of American history since day one that we have the right to speak freely to, about, and against those in the government.
Judge, do you think this is going to be one of those laws that is on the books but not enforced?
I think it's one of those laws that's going to be enforced where the government wants it enforced. The problem, Eric, is it puts a lot of unbridled discretion in the hands of Secret Service agents who may very well say, you know what, boss, you've had a rough day. We'll keep everybody away from you. Or, you know what, boss, this crowd likes you, so we're going to let you hear them. That's suppressing speech on the basis of its content. And that has been expressly prohibited by the First Amendment since day one.
What dictates the Secret Service is present? In other words, aren't they present all over Washington, D.C.?
Well, they are, and that's a great question, because this law also allows the president to give Secret Service protection to whoever he wants. I'll give you a bizarre example. His campaign managers are coming to Washington to confer with him about the campaign. He can give them Secret Service protection. And then the Secret Service can say to the kids in the streets, you can't shout at David Axelrod, because the campaign manager, because the Secret Service is protecting him. This is a slow, creeping destruction of some of our basic liberties, and the president signed it in secret.
And now some of the Secret Service are going to be providing services for the candidates now as well,
correct?
Right? So
correct.
People aren't going to be able to have their opinion about the candidates?
If the Secret Service so declares, you won't be able to shout at them.
Judge, got to go. The economy's not bad. Sorry about that.
So what do you think about that? When it's not just people like Kari Ilonummi saying that we got a problem here and that this is unconstitutional, but we got judges coming out, stepping to the plate, stating the same thing as well. Well, that judge there is a man that obviously cares about the Constitution and freedom. And while him and I see what would be aspects of the credit system in Hamilton, economics differently in general, I have to say that that man knows his stuff when it comes to the Constitution. So economics is a tricky issue. And that's the issue with Ron Paul as well. He's a good guy, but there's just a little bit he just doesn't understand about that factor. But hey, no one's perfect. No one knows it all. So we have Secretary of State Hillary Clinton stating that the Syrian President Assad, quote, must go, unquote. You know what that means? We have the Muslim Brotherhood aiming at taking over the presidency in Egypt on an FT.com article. We have Obama threatening regime change in North Korea as well. just nation after nation. You know, Iran on the table, Syria being invaded already, with the threats of Russia and China now being more direct and in mainstream news and media, North Korea. Isn't this kind of sound like Bush? Aren't these kind of sound like the fantasies and the war driver under the Bush-Cheney regime playing out under a Peace Prize president? You know, somebody mentioned the other day to me that there is no one that can propel the far radical right further than the so-called opposite of the liberal left, because they have the technique of a velvet glove over an iron fist, as typified by President Obama being a Peace Prize president. So all of a sudden we're raiding these other countries illegally, by the way, but it's all under the name of love and peace. It's under the guise of protecting the interest of the protesters and these poor citizens that are having their human rights trampled and violated upon. Doesn't that sound so much different than under Bush? Because we're doing it for a good deed and for a good reason. But are we really? Is this any different? Or is this just a way of putting lipstick on the pig to make it look a little bit more pretty and a little bit of perfume so you don't smell the manure, but yet it's still a pig? It's like Bush and Cheney never left office. But now you have the liberal Democrats stepping aside. That's right. The liberal Democrats that were denouncing the wars under what would be George W. Bush and Cheney. The ones that thought it was just so horrendous of what was being done to our civil liberties globally and here at home. Now, where all these liberal Democrats at now? Most of them aren't here with no spin news source. Oh no. Even though they understood and agreed when it was applied toward a fascist right-wing Republican, now it's a liberal left Democrat, and there's supposed to be some kind of a difference here. For those folks, let me break this down real fast for you. From the far-reaching right or the liberal left, we're continuing to get the same effects, which is a downward spiral of the nation. So, if you really want to talk about civil liberties and rights being trampled on, well, look right here at home. Look at the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011. Getting rid of what would be habeas corpus, due process. Getting rid of aspects of the Constitution that go even further beyond that even, such as what would be posse comitatus, which will allow tanks on our streets and military to police us. That's right. You think that's some crazed conspiracy theory? Well, you must be new to the show or not quite with it with reality, one of the two. But go back to the February show. Look at our links on Twitter and Facebook and information that we continue to process and to place online for you here on this forum. So, we have Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki denounces the Syria intervention, stating, quote, "We reject any arming and the process to overthrow the regime, because this will leave a greater crisis in the region." And he's absolutely right. It will. Because when you remove the Syrian president, just like what happened with Gaddafi, just like with Saddam Hussein, you think you're getting rid of one devil, but guess what? You're allowing a vacuum in which a greater demon and devil is taken over, such as Al-Qaeda. Our so-called enemy is now working with us in overthrowing the Syrian regime and was there with us in Libya too. Now this is kind of a conflict of interest and a contradiction, as we are going after Al-Qaeda, but yet we are working with Al-Qaeda to overthrow these leaders. That's questionable. Are they our friends? Are they our enemies? So, that is the question. Now, discussing the American system of political economy, which, by the way, is the only true standing, legitimate battle that can defeat what would be the British Imperial Free Trade System. Because there's only two. The American system of political economy is defined within our preamble of our Constitution regarding Hamilton and a credit system, versus this imperial, fascist, British free trade system as typified by what would be Adam Smith, Jeremy Bentham, and Thomas Malthus, the ones that created the doctrines going back to the 17 and 1800s of what we know today is the British imperial system of economy. So it's on that topic of discussion that we're going to show you a quick video at this point to help elaborate on some of the specifics of the difference between our system and theirs, and why it's so fundamental that we protect this system, because we are the only true impediment that has the ability to put an end to empire once and for all. So check out this video. We'll be right back.
If you want to survive, you have to fight. The oligarchical system is collapsing. The British Empire is intent to use thermonuclear war to destroy mankind, and the principle of the U.S. Constitution is at stake. But we're not referring to the Constitution of the Tea Party, Ron Paul, Romney, or Obama. The Constitution of which we speak is that of true patriots, and we must defend. The seldom understood Constitution of the credit system. If we wish to survive, we must return to the principles of the American Revolution, the credit system, to win. The American credit system, as it developed specifically in the United States, had always been our prime weapon in the development of humanity against the European oligarchies of old. Our credit system was not some nice economic policy formed after the founding of the Constitution, but it had always been the intention of the United States. It was formed in the Massachusetts Bay Colony with the original charter in 1630, forcibly removed by the British in the 1680s, and this fight has always been the battleground between the British Empire and the rest of the world led by the United States. We were always looked to by other nations to fight for them as the temple of liberty and beacon of hope for all mankind. Benjamin Franklin was a student of the Winthrops and Mathers, the best representatives of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Franklin was justly considered the leading scientist on Earth, and he created a grouping of scientists and statesmen called the Junto to develop a core citizenry through education, science, and culture. He knew that the creation of a republic would require generations of a developed populace to effectively wage warfare, cultural, intellectual, and eventually militarily. One of the members of Franklin's extended junto was Hugh Knox, a scholarly Presbyterian minister deployed to the Caribbean to aid in the global fight to establish a republic. He was preaching at a church on a small island in the West Indies when he met a young Alexander Hamilton and quickly recognized his genius. Knox gave Hamilton access to his extensive library and organized for Hamilton to come to the United States, where he eventually ended up as aide-de-camp to Commander of the Continental Army, General George Washington. The same George Washington, who as a major in 1754 was the first to provoke the military action of the French and Indian War on behalf of Benjamin Franklin. As top aide to the man commanding the responsibility of the waging of the military arm of the conflict, Hamilton foresaw the need to establish a system of government and economy that would allow for continued development of the country, as the only safeguard of the nation against the British Empire-led oligarchies of Old World Europe. Contrary to deluded and popular belief, a credit system is not a monetary system. It is the constitutionally enshrined commitment to development, the power employed by a sovereign nation-state based on the future state of mankind. Hamilton, already during the war, began organizing the mobilization for the adoption of the U.S. Constitution as the means for what he had already recognized as the continuation of the necessary American credit system, just like John Winthrop, the Mathers, Ben Franklin, and George Washington before him. The Constitution was not an afterthought of the victory in the war, or a response to a disheveled government. Just as Franklin was the legacy of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who recruited and taught the generation who would lead the war, so the credit system had always been recognized by all generations of patriots as the best and only durable weapon in that war. But these are not just nice stories or academic issues. Most Americans don't realize what the stakes are and what the scoreboard is. Little less do they understand where our country came from. So, for instance, in this painting by John Singleton Copley, our founding father Sam Adams is pointing to the great work of his founding fathers, the Massachusetts Bay Charter of John Winthrop, written in 1630. This long-fought war by generations of American patriots to establish a credit system and the Constitution we created to implement it has been the most rarely understood campaign of our long struggle. The credit system has been our most serious, if covered up, weapon that our nation possesses to destroy the British Empire. And indeed, almost every time an American president has effectively used the Constitution to wield the credit system, the British have had them killed. So, then, are you surprised that the British Empire would be attacking the candidacy of Jacques Cheminade? Jacques Cheminade's campaign for the French presidency is now the clearest voice of sanity in Europe, and it should come as no surprise that he has now come under vicious attack by the British Empire for what he represents. As we've reported, since Cheminade has officially qualified to run in the presidential elections in France, the campaign has received outpourings of support. Cheminade has been fully vindicated in the eyes of the people for correctly forecasting, in 1995, the now terminal economic crises, and they are fed up with Sarkozy continuing to follow the script of the British Empire, as in France's involvement in the murder of Gaddafi last year. Over the last week, with the revelations that the Queen of England has indeed engaged in drug trafficking, Cheminade's warning on this subject, days prior to the printed revelations, have cemented his leadership in the eyes of the French population all the more securely. Cheminade has been the foremost spokesman in Europe for the implementation of Glass-Steagall-type banking laws as a necessary part of a credit system, and the British Empire are now reacting with printed attacks out of desperation. They see the attacks on their imperial finance policy as a threat to their stated intention to launch thermonuclear war. LaRouche said, "The British oligarchy is terrified of what I represent and what my associates and I are capable of doing to wreck their plans for thermonuclear extinction or a post-nation-state plunge into a horrific global dark age. The British imperial monetary system is doomed, and they are scared to death at the alternative that I offer." In the United States, we are providing the alternative, and we can win if we fight. LaRouche PAC has of yet endorsed 6 candidates for federal office, our national slate of congressional candidates. Though these candidates are running for U.S. Congress, they are running on a national presidential policy slate, typified by 3 major policy goals. First, the removal of President Obama from office, using Section 4 of the 25th Amendment or an outright impeachment resolution. Obama has lost it, and we want to remove him before he can follow in the last fatal footsteps of the Roman Emperor Nero. Second is to restore Glass-Steagall banking laws. This would just separate the worthless, toxic waste junk paper and honor the legitimate obligations in the banking system. Third is the credit system, which we have been discussing. The most accessible elaboration of the credit system can now be found in the just released NWAPA 21 report on the LaRouche PAC website. NWAPA 21 principal author Michael Kirsch has been broadcasting a companion video series on this release, and we will continue to elaborate the policy as we get it implemented as national policy. The only hope for the American population is typified by NWAPA. Mobilizing millions of skilled and unskilled labor, embarking on the largest construction project ever known to man, a project that will require generations of investment. But that's the way Americans used to think. We can win. We just need to beat the British Empire.
And there you go. Now, as mentioned not too long ago, prior to me getting sick and losing the plug for the video camera, so I wasn't able to show this on the April report, unfortunately, I had mentioned in the past that what would be former presidential candidate and United States Senator John McCain had made threats toward what would be newly re-elected President Vladimir Putin of Russia. So I'd like to show you those threats and his remarks when commenting on the tweet that he gave through Twitter to Vladimir Putin regarding, quote, "a Arab Spring is coming to a neighborhood near you, Vlad." So here it is. Check this video footage out.
U.S. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has acknowledged were involved in the former Libyan leader's death. So in his traditional year-end gaggle with the press today, Putin was asked about a prediction that McCain supposedly made online about the prime minister meeting the same fate as Gaddafi. Well, Putin did not think highly of McCain's comments.
Mr. McCain is known to have fought in Vietnam. I think he has enough blood of innocent civilians on his hands. And he probably can no longer live without these horrible, disgusting scenes when television screens across the world showed how Gaddafi was being killed, all covered with blood. Is that democracy?
All right, but as it turns out, the senator's Twitter posts were links to news stories which suggested that Russia might be facing its own quote-unquote Arab Spring. After all, some leaders who lost power in the Arab Spring merely ended up on trial or exiled to Saudi Arabia. Gaddafi's
and the president was never serious about it. Could I mention another issue to you? Did you hear about Mr. Putin's statement about me today?
No. What did George Bush used to call him? Pootie Poot. What has he said about you?
Well, when the demonstrations took place a few days ago, I said, "Dear Vlad," I tweeted, "Dear Vlad, the Arab Spring is coming to a neighborhood near you." Well, there's, you get it, we'll send it to you, but it's an AP story by a guy named Vladimir Ishkinikov. Putin rejects any redo of fraud-tainted vote. Apparently he was on a call-in show, which he does once a year, and he talks about how he says there's nothing wrong with the election, etc. And he says Putin also lashed out at U.S. Senator John McCain, who had goaded him with a Twitter posted saying, quote, "The Arab Spring is coming to a neighborhood near you." Quote, listen to this, quote, "He has the blood of peaceful civilians on his hands, and he can't live without the kind of disgusting, repulsive scenes like the killing of Gaddafi," Putin said, referring to McCain's role as a combat pilot and prisoner of war in Vietnam. Quote, "Mr. McCain was captured and they kept him not just in prison, but in a pit for several years," he said. "Anyone in his place would go nuts."
Well,
I'm not making that up.
You've been insulted.
So, we're all beginning to see that it really is not just Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, or North Korea, or any of these other nation states. We're beginning to see, as the point that I've been trying to drill in through show after show after show, that what is happening is not based upon civil liberties, oil, or anything else. It's a power grab, and what it is a British Empire trying to propel the United States and other nations to go against each other. This is what empire does. Divide and conquer. You ever hear about that? Divide and conquer. So when you want to take over your enemies, you find ways to divide them. You find all kinds of divisive little issues. Well, I'm a Republican, but I'm a Democrat. I guess we can't work together. Wrong answer. You shouldn't be serving the Democratic Party. You shouldn't be loyal in serving the Republican Party. As I had mentioned to one person recently that thinks that she knows more about this president than I do. I stated, well, let's hope for you and I both that you see something that I don't. But let's get this straight. As this person made me a bet and said that if I'm wrong about my take on this whole birther issue and what would be Sheriff Joe Arpaio, which I'll be showing you a video of in a minute, and regarding probable cause that has now been labeled against President Obama by an active sheriff. That's right, probable cause has been declared. That this individual wanted me, that if, begged me basically, that if I find that out that I'm wrong, wanted to make me make a deal with her that I would adamantly join the Democratic Party and fight for Obama's re-election. And I stated, hey, first of all, I'm pretty confident about what I know from my information, but at the same time, I can't do that. And I'm sorry. While this individual is my friend, and I'm sure she means well, she somehow still thinks, she's an older friend, she's about 71 or 2, seems to think that Obama is bringing change you can believe in. Obviously, the wheels are turning a bit slower for this poor woman, as bright as she is in other categories. But ultimately, as I stated to her, I apologize, but my loyalty is not to the party, as I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I voted for people in both parties. You can find that out, my track record. My voting record, just like yours, is public information. I voted for a Democrat in 2004 presidency, which was Lyndon LaRouche. I voted in 2008 for a Republican, which at that point was Congressman Ron Paul. So, it's not about Republican, Democrat, it's about policy. And as I mentioned to what would be this lady and friend of mine, which lives down in Shoreline, Edmonds area of Washington State, so just north of Seattle, I mentioned that my loyalty is to the interest of the nation state and what would be the general welfare clause as defined within the preamble of our federal constitution. That's where my loyalty is to the interest of the nation state. So, what is popular opinion? Well, sometimes in history, the nation thinks it's popular and thinks it's even good for them to drive off a cliff. I know many people who think that free trade is wonderful and a great thing. But you don't know free trade like I do. Anybody who thinks they do, well, my question to you is this. Have you read Reports on Manufacturing by Alexander Hamilton, our first Treasury Secretary, as appointed by what would be none other than General and President George Washington? Have you read his doctrines? No? Well, Mr. or Mrs. Free Trader, have you, that individual, have you read the doctrines of Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and Jeremy Bentham? Have you read their books and doctrines of the British Empire? If your answer is still no, then my question to you is, what the hell do you know about economics? The answer is squat. You don't know anything. Even if you went to an average college in the United States and you think you know economics, you don't. It's shot economics. It's free tradership. You like free trade? You see what's happening in America? You see how the homeless are rising? You see how crime's rising? You see how people are turning on each other? Starvation, lack of education, all these things happening? Hell, which is just beginning to unfold? If you like these things, then you really do like free trade. If you don't, the chances are you really don't. You may be too dumb to know otherwise, but trust me, if you're a real human being that wants to see progress of this nation, you like the credit system as defined within our Constitution. Free trade is your enemy. It's divide and conquer. And if your loyalty is to the party, Democrat, Republican, or whatever, if your loyalty is to the party prior to the nation, then if you haven't yet, you are destined to commit treason. Guaranteed. There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. If your loyalty is to a party, that's false, and that's not right. So, here we go. We have Goldman Sachs has major shares in a company called Village Voice Media. Look that up. Goldman Sachs, Village Voice Media, sex scandal. That's right. Just when you thought these people were raping the willing, well, perhaps it's going a step further. That's right. Goldman Sachs has major shares in a company called Village Voice Media, which oversees some of the biggest alternative newspapers in America. On the firm's client list is a website called Backpage.com. That's right, Backpage.com, which is a site which is involved in online sex trade. Jerry Schmetterer, a spokesperson for the Brooklyn District Attorney Charles Hines, told Reuters, quote, "In every case of sex trafficking that the Brooklyn District Attorney has, the girl was involved with Backpage.com at some point or another," unquote. So, just when you begin to see how dirty Goldman Sachs and company can be, you just find out it just goes further and further. The hole just goes deeper and deeper. This is very interesting and amazing. Also, you look at the Treasury Secretaries under Bush, under Obama. Guess where all these people have came from? Goldman Sachs. That's right. Goldman Sachs. So, change you can believe in, baby. Sure. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries are creating a multi-million-dollar slush fund to bankroll the Syrian rebels battling President Assad's regime. Turkey's foreign minister stated that the Syrian National Council is a, quote, legitimate representative of all Syrians, unquote. Now you notice how it's other countries? It's Turkey's foreign minister that decides for the people of Syria what would be their spokesperson is and representative. You notice it's not the people of Syria saying, we want regime change, we want Assad gone, we want this Syrian National Council and Friends of Syria to take over. You notice it's not them that's asking for it. It's not them that's saying it's so necessary. It's other nations. It's the United States. It's Turkey. It's Saudi Arabia. It's all these countries. Just like how we're the ones that are saying about what needs to be shoved down the throats of Iran and Syria, Libya, this and that. The people of Libya did not ask us to come in there and remove Gaddafi. We decided we were going to go in there. We decided Gaddafi had to go. More like the British Empire, but when you got what would be this president hanging off the ass of the Queen of England and doing what she says with what would be his loyalty to the Queen, and you're going to see it here in a few minutes, that video footage. That's right, at what would be the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Tour, where Obama tells you himself just where his loyalty is at. Literally, he tells you. When I saw this video footage, I couldn't have asked for more. I almost choked, literally, when I saw this, because I realized, wow, you know, it's like I can take the horse to water, but a lot of people are only going to see this so far. So what would be, when it gets to this point, you don't have too many other options. So, shut it off. Sorry about that, folks. We had a little interruption there. Some sickly folks in the crowd. Hopefully we got that out of our system. So, moving onward, as we're mentioning, ultimately, we have all these people that are in other nations that are trying to decide what people should do in their country. The Clintons and Obama think Assad should leave, just like Gaddafi should have left, and this and that and the other, and Saddam. But who the hell are we, or they, to go around the rest of the world and overthrow regimes? So we're seeing this paradigm as it's playing out under the Peace Prize presidency, under the Clintons. They're all folding and coming together. That's right, they're coming into play. So basically the Republicans or Democrats, it's just a little bit more from the liberal left or far-reaching right, but it's still the same thing. It's two sides of the same coin. So you're really not going to get a real difference with the slew of candidates, including what would be the guy I voted for 4 years ago, Ron Paul. Ron Paul, Congressman Paul, is a good guy in general. There's been many attacks and things against him to convince you he's not electable and to get the people distanced from him. But he's presenting real issues and bringing them into the arena, constitutional principles and things that have not been brought into the play in many, many years. So, with that being stated, there's a certain amount of respect that I have for Ron Paul. Where my support wanes at a certain level is when it comes to economics. Because while Congressman Ron Paul is the only one out of the whole slew of candidates, Obama, Romney, Gingrich, Santorum, and whatnot, he's the only one out of all these candidates that does not want World War III. He's the only one that's wanting to take our troops out of all these other nations and mind our own business. So that's definitely step one. That's a real good step. But the problem is, even under Ron Paul, and I had this conversation with many Republicans lately, which aren't liking this, let me tell you, that ultimately we're still destined to starve and topple as a nation ourselves under a Ron Paul presidency because he does not understand economics, which is unfortunate. So it would go a certain way, and there'd be a lot of good elements and things that would come into be under a Ron Paul presidency. But the difference is between, say, a Ron Paul presidency and Obama or these other people will send us to World War III and we'll be starving and dying out right away, where it'll be a slow starvation under a Ron Paul presidency, because he does not support what would be a return to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall Act. He does not support the credit system as clearly defined within the Constitution that he claims so much to be about. He's about Austrian economics, which is, and the poor guy doesn't know better. He doesn't. I don't believe he's corrupt. I believe he's just a little dumb on this note, that Austrian economics is a tentacle of the British free trade system. And Ron Paul explicitly states that it's not some old principle of economics that's going to help us. It's the Austrian principle of economics. So Austrian and American system of economics are two different things, Mr. Ron Paul. So it's sad as it is to say, well, he's the best thing we have going for us right now, he's still not a presidential figure. So I have to be the one that breaks it to you. Just like I did back when everybody thought, no, Kari, you don't understand. It's going to be change you can believe in. It's not Bush Cheney anymore. It's going to be a liberal left Democrat. It's going to be change. It's going to be great. And I said, sorry to bust your bubble there. It may be a first black man in history, but just because it's a black man doesn't necessarily mean it's the black man for the job. You know, some people, you know, this is a very sensitive topic. People are scared to say anything bad about someone if they're black or another ethnicity. I don't care what color they are. Why do I call this president Black Bush? Because he's the same fecal matter that came out of the horse's butt, just like that spawned what would be George W. Bush in his presidency. Look at his father, George W. Bush's father, which was knighted by the crown, by the Queen of England herself. If you know anything about that, it's not just some little fun thing. To be knighted, there's certain power you get. There's certain obligations that you sign as well. Your loyalty. You get money for the rest of your life after you're knighted. So it's a give and take system, but you're part of a system, the oligarchical British free trade imperial system. Now we want to go another generation past Bush Sr. Look at his dad, Prescott Bush, the granddad to our former president. Look in the Library of Congress. Do you know what he was indicted for? Charges of what would be helping to put money into the account of Adolf Hitler. Literally, Adolf Hitler. Now that's about the time of the show when you say, oh, this is enough. I'll tell you what, if you really got the balls, why don't you do this? Pause the program, run over to your computer and Google that up. Prescott Bush, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, connections to Nazi Germany, Hitler. Google that. And then tell me I'm the kook. Go ahead, put me on pause and Google that. Test my credibility. I dare you. Or you could just sit there and say, I'm the idiot conspiracy theorist, and you know so much better, and you could just shut off the program right now. But we'll find out if you seek the truth, for if you really got the balls to go Google what I told you to Google. Now, a major donor of the campaign donor of the President Barack Obama, and on the list of bundlers, has been accused of defrauding a businessman and impersonating a bank official. The name of this lady is Abake Asangba, or Abake Asangba, however you pronounce it. So, look at all these criminals. We have the U.S. military tries to delete Staff Sergeant Bale's criminal record, which was that psycho soldier who murdered 16 innocent Afghan citizens recently. The NSA denies eavesdropping on Americans. Sure they don't. Do you know who started Google? Let me just give you a hint. It has ties to the NSA. That's right, folks. Marine Sergeant Gary Stein is facing disciplinary actions for his critique of Obama on his Armed Forces Tea Party page on Facebook. Feds considering closing courtrooms to help cut cost. Because this budget isn't getting any bigger. You've noticed. You gotta cut, they say. Do we? Doesn't the standards of living supposed to be increasing? But yet, what's coming down the pipeline is them saying that we have to have less health care, less pension, less jobs, less people. Now, for those scriptural folks, God-loving folks out there, what does it say in the Bible? It says, be fruitful and multiply. That's the commandment. That's the order given to us. Be fruitful and multiply. What is the British free trade system of environmentalism? Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, state that we have to reduce the world's population to that of around 1 billion people. Scriptures say, be fruitful and multiply. Prince Philip and company say we need to do the opposite. So therefore, if that is not a reflection that empire is rooted in satanic ideology, I don't know what is. And that's just one example that I could give you. The House votes to repeal part of Obama Health Care Act. Google plans to spy on background noise in your phone calls, according to a Mail Online article, March 23rd, 2012. Remember what I said about Google? That's right. Why don't you Google that? Google plans to spy on background noise in your phone calls. That's right. Just Google that up. Look into it. Lord Monckton states, quote, I am no birther, but Obama birth certificate, quote, plainly a forgery, unquote. Now, I mentioned earlier, it's now official. That's right. I mentioned a few months ago that the birther issue was back. And some of you wondered, what does that mean? Well, I can only tell so much without having certain elements to show. So, today, we have the video footage to show of what would be Sheriff Joe Arpaio. His investigation concluded that Barack H. Obama, quote, his long-form birth certificate is not authentic, unquote. So, what does that mean? Well, nobody said that Obama committed a crime. It's simply that the long-form birth certificate is not authentic. So obviously somebody committed a crime out there that presented this and whatnot. But the question is who and what and how far does this go? And what implications will this have for our so-called Hawaiian-born president that's starting to appear more and more as if he came from Kenya? And speaking of Kenya, what would be Jerome Corsi went to Kenya to investigate the place where supposedly Barack Obama was born at in Kenya, where many people state that they know him, went to school with him, remember him clearly. He went and looked, and just so happens there was a missing element of script for the day that Obama was born. That's right, somebody played with the records and actually cut out what would be a chunk of what would be the records for pertaining to the day that Barack Obama would have been born, for if he was born in Kenya. So the question is, does one find it a bit coincidental that the day that Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, that somebody tampers with records at a place in Kenya as well? Do you remember the grandmother of Barack Obama? Do you remember this? Several years ago, stating that she was there when her grandson was born in Kenya? That's right, the grandma. Look around on YouTube and through Google on that. I'm sure it's becoming less easy to find, but I'm sure it's still out there. I heard it myself. I remember that distinctively. As a matter of fact, I remember listening to, I believe it was Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie or somebody, and he had some activist or somebody on there, and they played this footage. I think it was from an attorney, actually. It was an attorney. So, here we go, folks. We're going to show you right now what would be the interview with Sheriff Judge Arpaio.
Yeah, I'm here in Maricopa County with Sheriff Joe. A really brief introduction. He just revealed the findings of the cold case posse. Sheriff, if you would, just let us give a quick rundown of what you just talked about in the press conference.
You got an hour and a half. Well, you know, this came to my attention with the Tea Party in Surprise, Arizona, a few months ago.
Yes, sir.
They had a petition, came to my office, asked me resort. Sheriff, please do this. And I didn't want to just throw their request in the wastebasket. I don't think that's right. I report to them. They're my bosses. So in order to get the media, take one hit piece against me from the media by accusing me of using taxpayers' money, I decided to give it to my volunteer professional posse, who are well-trained and work under the Constitution. The sheriff can swear them in. So they've been there a while. I didn't just swear them in for this. So why not use a cold case posse? That really fits it. So I gave it to them. And I didn't want, I told them, however it comes out, if we can clear the President of the United States, I was just as happy. They were even leery of this investigation, but then they dug into it, came up with a lot of information about the birth certificate,
Yes, sir.
and also the immigration, the selected service card that few people knew about. But I think when you look at the technical displays, which I'm not very familiar with, but you can see that there's some problems with the birth certificate, and you can see there's problems with the selected service.
And I completely agree with you, but what I found most shocking about your press conference was the complete desire by the media to not even care about what you were presenting. Would you care to comment on that?
You know, that's sad. The media has been putting a blackout on this issue for quite a while. I didn't see the national media talking about it. Now maybe they will talk about it, because another thing we did, thanks to you, is put this live.
Yes, sir.
Now, they can compare what the media says and what's the real truth by looking at it. That's why it's good to do that, and they probably knew it too. So, it's sad. It's sad how the media does things here when you're dealing with the President of the United States. Trying to get me accusing him with a crime. I never accused him of a crime.
And you didn't know that was what they tried to stay on the entire time, and in fact, derail the conversation of what the cold case posse finding out that it looks like these are forgeries, which you never accused a president of actually forging the documents. You were trying to find out who it is. Can you talk about what you're going to be doing in terms of potentially going after the individual who may have put together these forged documents?
The big issue right now that I have is, where do I go from here?
Yes, sir.
First of all, the investigation is not complete. The only reason I went public on this preliminary investigation is the fact I told the Tea Party that I would go public. I said at the end of February, I didn't want to do it because that's the election, the presidential election occurring would look too much like politics. So I waited one day later, March 1, to go public and give the information out and let the people decide, and hope that I generate some interest, especially with law enforcement, whether it's federal, Hawaii, that may call and say, hey, we can help you. I'm not holding my breath on that. But normally, if we had this information about a crime they committed in Hawaii, alleged forgery and fraud, I would get in touch with the police or whoever and say, we got this information. It's your jurisdiction. We'll work together. I'll send my detectives down there, and we'll develop the investigation to see if we can catch the forger.
Yes, sir.
Normally that's what would happen. But we know, according to our investigation, can we really trust Hawaii? Because we're dealing with the health department there, whoever maintains these records, and there's some missing here, missing there, so why don't they just come up? I said from day one, come up with a micro.
Yes, sir.
That's all.
It seems pretty simple.
That's very simple. Why does Hawaii come up with it?
Well, what is it the media? Again, I think the main point of what the press conference became was it was an attack on you for being the person to bring this up. I think the better question should be, why is the media doing their job and actually asking these questions? And again, I think.
There's a significant difference between directly stating that President Obama was not born in the United States versus as this sheriff is doing, which is saying, this is not a silly question. if it's the president or if it's some bum selling an ice cream sandwich on Skid Row. It's a legitimate question, and for anybody to want to see the microfilm and proof that this president, especially a man occupying the highest office of the land of the United States of America, for anybody to call somebody a birther or to scoff and ridicule someone for wanting to see the proof, that is absurd. Senator John McCain was forced to present what would be evidence before the Congress to prove the legitimacy of his United States citizenship. So wouldn't it be common sense for Barack Obama to do the same? The birther issue is back. Like it or not.
It shows, I don't know if you listeners, you heard the song playing on Sheriff Joe's cell phone. It was I Did It My Way, Let the Record Show by Frank Sinatra, and I think we owe it to America's Sheriff Joe, that to actually have investigated something that a lot of people around the country have been hoping the media would do, and it fell into Sheriff Joe and his cold case posse.
Well, you heard one of my friends, the reporters, well, why isn't it everybody else looked at it? No, they never looked at this.
No,
they never brought this out.
Yes,
Tell
sir.
me, who has brought this out? Law enforcement. No one. So don't go telling me everybody else has looked at it. I'm the only one that really looked at it in law enforcement, and that's what's going to shake everybody up, because all we have is innuendo. Nothing against you guys, I know, but you're pretty well on track, too. Some things may not surprise you. However, no one's really officially looked at it. And I'm a law enforcement guy. Why can't I look at it? And when we come up with possible forgery or what would I do? I just forget this now and throw it in a wastebasket? I don't care if it's a janitor that did it. I mean, someone violated the law, or we have probable cause. Now we got to prove it. It's good probable cause out there. I'm not saying they're guilty, which is in law enforcement, you work on probable cause. This isn't just a suspicion. I think it's one step higher on probable cause. When you have probable cause, you continue the investigation, get enough evidence to get those people charged. So what am I supposed to do? Drop it? If you look at the charts and everything, it looks like there's a lot of smoke out there, right?
Yes, sir.
Anybody in their right mind will know that. Look at the selected service. Did you guys know about the selected service?
Yes. Yeah.
But you didn't know about the 80. You didn't know about that. We got the equipment too. You could not know. You could never get that. We got it.
Well, something tells me we're just getting started here. And from Maricopa County with Sheriff Joe, this is Michael Thompson.
Well, thank you for your support. Thank you for letting the public know the true story, and not what the media wants to twist around, because they know me, and anytime they can jab me, they're going to do it. But you know what? They can jab me all they want, as long as they say I'm doing my job, whether they like it or not. I'm doing my job, so they can jab me, try to insult me, degrade me. It's not going to work. Here, Buster, 20 years they've been going after me. But they can't get me. I've been married 55 years to the same gal. I have no skeleton, so the only thing they can try to do is embarrass me the way I do my job, which isn't going to stop because I'm running again.
All right.
My sixth time, and everybody's ganging up on me. This is another issue I don't need. I got enough issues with the Justice Department, illegal immigration. I don't need this one, believe me. And all my campaign people say, leave it alone, you're never going to win on this one. Everybody tells me, there's all these policies, you'll never win. You know what, you hear what I said? I said I'm going to do it. It's from my heart. People asked me to do it. I did it, and I think we're going to be successful. And then we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Sheriff.
The truth is too much to handle. That's someone else's problem, not ours. So, how can you disagree with that? This is a guy that thought that the whole birther thing was a crock That's why you had the cold case posse, an entity that was not using taxpaying money, but very credible and sworn in under oath to investigate what would be the findings and the circumstances of the legitimacy of the Barack Obama presidency, and if he was really born in the United States or not. And what's interesting is while they set out to prove what would be the legitimacy and the honesty of this president, every step of the way they kept finding more and more damning information that forced them to see that there was something to this story. So while they set out to disprove it, because of the fact that they care about the law, they're forced to show the findings of what they have. And they're only beginning because they came across a whole bunch of other information not even relevant to the birth certificate as well, but relevant to this president. And this is going to be coming out over the next months to come, more and more. Now, we've all heard about the Trayvon Martin case. Very interesting. Everybody's trying to use this. Not everybody, but there are many people out there trying to use this to instigate race wars, to get blacks on whites and whites on blacks and this and that. This is not what we want as a nation. Remember, divide and conquer? This is imperial games. You got to see through this, or you're going to play the dummy and the puppet. And that's not what we want. So, while there's a lot of evidence that's showing potential faults on both sides of the line, potentially, there are individuals such as Senator Chuck Schumer that's trying to exploit the Trayvon Martin case to outlaw, quote, stand your grounds rights for the states, which is self-defense laws around the nation in approximately half the states. So our Second Amendment is under attack. And folks like Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer, has acknowledged that he wants the people to let the authorities to handle crisis when it hits, or to run away and remove yourself from the circumstances. Well, I don't believe, if I'm at a park or if I'm somewhere publicly, who the hell is anybody to kick me out of that park or whatever public place? Somebody's coming at me with a baseball bat and I'm expected to run? Well, luckily not in my state. We have the stand your grounds law, which means if I really feel that my life is threatened or whatever, I have the right to defend myself. Simple as that. I don't have to wait to be stabbed 3 times or have the attacker crushing my skull on the concrete. I don't have to wait to that point. Once I feel that someone is a threat to me, they're coming at me, they want problems, they're trying to remove me from a public place and do harm to myself or family, I have the right to pull up my .45 and blow them away. I think that's fair and justified. But you have people that are trying to turn this nation into Europe. That's right, to be subservient, to run away when you have problems, or to go with the foe. Well, let's get something straight, folks. When the United States becomes like Europe, docile, and to where the only people that carry guns is the military, police, so government, or what would be the criminals, and that's what happens. When you outlaw what would be the guns, then people who don't want to be criminals, they give them up because they don't want to break the law, and then it's government and criminals that have the weapons then. What are you going to do to protect yourself then against tyrannical government if it comes to that point? And what would you do? What can you do when the robber comes to your door and he's the one with the shotgun and you don't even have a baseball bat? You're going to have to be subservient. So this isn't right. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of the Trayvon Martin case. If he's innocent or the guy that shot him was innocent. I'm not going to get caught up in these side variables. It's a side factor. What has to be addressed is that this is an attack against our Second Amendment. Obama has using this every which way he can to propel his cause. Look at his what would be voting record as a senator. He has the most anti-gun votes out of any senator in the past. If he gets reelected, I can assure you the Second Amendment will be one of the first things that come under real heavy attack and fire under his second presidency. I personally believe he's on his way out, and I personally believe there's going to be so much more damning information that's going to occur and come out over the next several months. He's going to break down psychologically or what have you, but the people I don't think are going to vote him back in. That may change It's possible, but I think this is a one-term duck. So we still have several months to see how the year pans out and plays out. But anyway, we have the UK Queen of England herself being accused of drug trafficking. Google that. UK Queen accused of drug trafficking. So I mentioned earlier about the make and break point as we're finishing up the show today. And we have some videos that you get to see afterward as well. From, including what would be an LPAC presentation on specifically Dope Inc. by what would be Jeffrey Steinberg, which is very important to see the British connection to drugs and how that links to what would be Obama and other people that are candidates. This is very interesting and vital information, so please watch this. But first, before we get there, we have for what would be you is this video of Barack Obama at the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Tour in March of this year, 2012, as the make or break point. So, I've mentioned before, it's the British Empire is the only true enemy of any nation state on the planet. I've stated before, over and over, this is the centerpiece of my politics, is the American system of political economy, Alexander Hamilton in other words, and the British Empire, which is our enemy. That's the centerpieces of my politics, as you guys know. This is what I've been laughed at, scoffed at, ran off the stage, stated I'm too controversial to speak at different events, as I was told a week ago. I wasn't told I was wrong about my take of reality. I was told I was too controversial. That's right. So, instead of telling you how it is, I'm going to let himself, Barack Obama, speak to you. That's right. Watch this video and then send me an email or step to the plate in a debate and tell me that the Queen of England is not running our White House. And tell me that President Barack Obama is not kissing the ass and subservient to the Queen of England. So, today's a shorter show on the note of my commentary, but still nonetheless providing you with a very impactful, heavy hit of reality and punch. As what I believe today is my make or break moment, and this April show is going to be a very big and heavily watched show throughout the months to come. So, last time I checked 2 months ago, NoSpinNewsSource.com is in 47 states, 34 nations on 6 continents throughout the globe. I haven't even checked what would be those figures, which I'm sure have totally increased. So, we'll have what would be a progress report of what's going on, as I'm going to look into that and enjoy some of my bragging rights. I've been just so focused on the news and everything else, I haven't had much of a chance to really look into some of these personal factors and give a pat on the back, but it is coming, so it's only fair. So here we go. Enjoy this video footage. I'm Kari Ilonummi. This is your NoSpinNewsSource.com monthly report for April 2012. Signing off. I'll see you in May. We're back in business, folks. That's right. We're back online. See you soon. Enjoy these videos.
Why? If their interest was to serve the country, wouldn't they listen to those institutions or governments who labor daily to preserve the national defense? And this begs the question, if not the nation, then whom and in what interest do these men really serve?
To Her Majesty the Queen, on her Diamond Jubilee, to our dear friends David and Samantha, and to the great purpose and design of our alliance. May we remain, now and always, His faithful servants. Cheers, everyone. To Her Majesty the Queen, on her Diamond Jubilee, to our dear friends David and Samantha, and to the great purpose and design of our alliance. May we remain, now and always, His faithful servants. Cheers, everyone. It's a plan that asks everyone to take responsibility for meeting this challenge. Everybody, including employers and individuals.
If a mandate was the solution, we could try that to solve homelessness by mandating everybody buy a house.
A system where every American bears responsibility for owning health insurance.
What are you going to do about it? Are you going to fine them? Are you going to garnish their wages?
Some of the reforms that we want for the insurance market are very hard to achieve unless we've got everybody covered.
We don't want to put in a situation in which on the front end we are mandating them, we are forcing them to purchase insurance, and if the subsidies are inadequate, the burden is on them and they will be penalized.
You can't control costs unless everyone is covered.
Hillary Clinton's attacking, but what's she not telling you about her health care plan? It forces everyone to buy insurance, even if you can't afford it, and you pay a penalty if you don't.
But you don't have an individual mandate, then what would everybody do?
If the government does not force taxpayers to buy health care, that we will penalize them in some fashion. I disagree with that. We do have a philosophical difference.
What do you think of that idea?
Senator Clinton has a different approach. She believes that we have to force people who don't have health insurance to buy it. Otherwise, there will be a lot of people who don't get it. I don't see those folks. And I think that it is important for us to recognize that if, in fact, you're going to mandate the purchase of insurance and it's not affordable, then there's going to have to be some enforcement mechanism that the government uses. And they may charge people who already don't have health care fines or have to take it out of their paychecks. And that, I don't think, is helping those without health insurance. That is a genuine difference.
Now, what I want to first ask is, what is the significance to the fact that Dope Inc. is being published now?
Well, there's a certain really delicious irony to the timing of the publication. Kind of underscores that, in many respects, this is the best of all possible worlds. We worked out a publishing agreement with a West Coast publishing house, and the book has been in the works for the better part of a year. But in particular, the fact that it has been released for publication in the last several months is of great significance, because right now we are witnessing the final disintegration of precisely the British international monetary system that has been integral to Dope Inc. going back centuries. But in particular, what we're witnessing now, and it may very well happen over the course of the next several days, is the collapse of the inter-alpha banking system. This is the City of London-centered financial cartel that was established in 1971 at exactly the moment that the Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates and regulated banking that had been established by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1944 was eliminated altogether. It occurred with great involvement of the Harold Wilson government in Great Britain. It was nominally done by Richard Nixon, and some British agents, including both George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, were instrumental in convincing Nixon to wipe out the Bretton Woods system. One of the consequences of the elimination of that regulated fixed exchange rate international banking system is that it opened the opportunity for speculators and criminals to have total access to the international financial system. It used to be that American banks were highly regulated and that American banks did not have corresponding relationships with banks in places like the Cayman Islands or the Isle of Man or the Channel Islands, areas that are at the center of the criminalization of international finance.
You're saying that what the Nixon administration did in 1971 to float the dollar and eliminate the fixed exchange rate internationally set the basis for what we're seeing today with the collapse of the financial system?
Absolutely. What we did is we shifted over from sovereign currencies, from regulated banking, and got more and more into a system of anything goes, international finance, money laundering, highly leveraged, unregulated speculation, all of the things that reached a break point in the year 2007 when the U.S. real estate bubble blew out, and that set off a chain reaction that we're seeing playing out literally this week, where the Irish government is being pressured under the terms of the Maastricht and Lisbon treaties to use taxpayers' money and to impose murderous austerity on the Irish people to bail out several of the major inter-alpha banks, including Allied Irish Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, a number of others. So it's the Jacob Rothschild banking cartel that was set up at exactly the moment that the Bretton Woods system was eliminated that is now going down the tubes. And those are the banks through which trillions of dollars a year in the proceeds from illegal drug trafficking are laundered. They're the main access point into the central bloodstream of the global financial system for criminal money. In fact, back in February of 2009, months after we had the next big ratchet collapse of the U.S. banking system, with the blowout of Lehman Brothers, the blowout of AIG Insurance, and then another gigantic bailout. At that point, the head of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Mr. Costa, gave an interview in which he said that because panic in the banking system has completely dried up credit, the only money available for any kind of purchases of real estate or things like that is drug money and other criminal proceeds. So what he was really saying is that you have a total integration of the so-called legitimate international financial system with the elements of what we at EIR called way back in 1979 Dope Inc., to make the point that this is an international financial and industrial cartel that operates like an international cartel and runs a global drug trade, ultimately on behalf of the British monarchy.
So what has changed then, since then, when Costa made that remark, and now?
Well, it's gotten a lot worse for the Inter-Alpha Group and for the entire British offshore financial structures, because nothing was done to solve the underlying problem. And the problem is that the entire British-centered global financial system is totally and irreparably bankrupt. There is no way that you can put it back together again. There's not enough murderous austerity that can be imposed on the populations of Europe and the Americas and other parts of the world to come up with enough money to bail out this bubble. It's doomed. And so right now, we have the happy specter of the disintegration of the British system. And we have a moment of opportunity here. We could go back to a system of regulated banking. Lyndon LaRouche has been demanding this for years, that here in the United States, we go back to a Glass-Steagall standard in which commercial banks are completely separated from brokerage houses, hedge funds, insurance companies, and that the speculative debt is simply written off. If you go to a gambling casino and lose all of your money, you should not have the right to turn to taxpayers and expect them to bail out your gambling debts. Well, guess what? That's what we've been doing consistently since the blowout of 2007. And now, in Ireland, the Irish government is coming under massive pressure from London, from the European Central Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, to force the Irish people to swallow a bailout of the inter-alpha banks. And it looks right now, particularly after a big electoral defeat for the Irish government yesterday, that that government is going to fall and that an opposition is going to come in that's going to simply say, no, we're not going to bail this bubble out. And if that happens, then the whole inter-alpha City of London financial system is finished. And the question then becomes, what is done to fill that vacuum? Do we go back to an American system, Hamiltonian approach, in which case we would have Glass-Steagall in the United States, similar re-regulation in other parts of the world, and probably very rapidly a treaty to both establish, once again, a fixed exchange rate and laws that would regulate banking to shut the door on criminal access to the banking system. That's been the hallmark of the British doping policy, going back hundreds of years, to have British banks that are at the disposal, top down, of the international criminal enterprise of doping, global trade in opium, in heroin, in cocaine, in marijuana, and all of these illegal drugs. But right now, that amounts to at least $1 trillion a year in revenue generated by illegal drug sales. It destroys the minds of countless millions of people around the world, and it's both a mechanism for maintaining the financial controls of the British Empire, and it's a way of destroying the minds of whole populations. So people are willing to be submissive to this kind of control.
What has been the impact of exposing this apparatus since you first exposed it in 1979? What has been the impact of the book and of the organizing internationally?
Well, look, for starters, back in 1979, the international drug trade was at a real takeoff point. And you had massive increases in production of illegal drugs. You had been through the 68er period, a decade earlier, where you suddenly had a very large and very vulnerable population of baby boomers in their 20s and 30s who were basically into illegal drugs. It was a dominant factor in what used to be called the drug rock sex counterculture. So drug trafficking, drug addiction, and the mental deterioration that went along with that was skyrocketing. But law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies all around the world tended to see this drug problem from the bottom up. They tended to think about criminal gangs that are part of an underground and underworld. Even the language that's used implies that it's some kind of low-life operation running up from the sewers. And what we demonstrated, really proved conclusively in Dope Inc., was that the drug trade is run top-down. It's run through the British monarchy and various criminal enterprises that are sponsored and protected by British intelligence, by the British financial apparatus. And we went back to the history. You know, people may not remember it, but certainly they do in China, that there were 2 opium wars in the middle of the 19th century, where the British Navy went in to China, to the open ports of Hong Kong and Canton, and used military force to impose opium addiction on the populations of China. And during that period, the British set up an entire structure for running the Far East drug trade. They set up the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation that was the central clearinghouse bank where the revenues of the illegal drug trade could be deposited and circulated around the world and integrated into the British finance system. They created the P&O steamship line, Pacific and Orient steamship line, as the means for trafficking the drugs around the world. They set up a company called Jardine and Matheson, which was a trading company that basically handled the marketing of opium futures and handled that aspect of the trade. So in other words, an entire global financial apparatus was set up before the middle of the 19th century to handle the opium trade and related other drug trades that were being sponsored top-down by the British. And we did studies. We interviewed people, for example, who had been in various government intelligence agencies, the CIA, German intelligence, other intelligence services in different parts of the globe, who had been battling the drug trade and who had certain eyewitness kind of sense certainty information, which they didn't understand the significance of. But as we were assembling this picture and looking at it top down from a historical standpoint and understanding the importance of these drug funds to the overall functioning of the British financial system, a different picture came together. We went to law enforcement agencies after the initial edition of the book was published, 1979, 1980, in the early 1980s, and people were absolutely astonished that the most fundamental axioms that they had been working off of, namely this idea that criminal syndicates are underground and have to sneak their way into the banking system and things like that, was totally wrong, and that they had to take a completely different approach. In the mid-1980s, Lyndon LaRouche delivered a presentation at a conference in Mexico City in which he laid out the parameters of how to conduct a war on drugs within the Western Hemisphere. And one of the main things that he emphasized was that you had to go after the money laundering, follow the money. And if you followed the money, you would find that all of the British offshore financial centers, as they were back in the middle of the 19th century, were in the middle of the laundering of the drug money. If you prevented the flow of those funds into the banking system, then the drug traffickers themselves would choke on their own cash, because you're talking about trillions of dollars a year today. But even back when we did the original study in 1979, we were looking at $300 billion, which was an enormous sum of money back then. It was larger than General Motors when General Motors was still a first-tier global automobile manufacturing company. It was larger than the biggest grain cartels. It was the world's #1 industry, but it was done completely offshore. And it relied on the fact that British banks in places like the Cayman Islands or in the Allied Dutch Antilles, now more recently Dubai in the Persian Gulf, these are major offshore centers directly tied to the big City of London banks. And those banks right now are in a process of meltdown and final disintegration. So as I say, it's a kind of a delicious irony that the book is out at a moment when the core of the doping apparatus, the money laundering system, the Inter-Alpha Group of Lord Jacob Rothschild, to name a central component of it, probably 70% of the bank transactions worldwide have gone through the Inter-Alpha banks until very recently. But if you shut the doors of the banks and place police guards at the front door, then this is a crucial, crippling blow to the entire international narcotics trade.
How have the British reacted to this expose over the years by EIR, and what do you think the reaction could be now?
Well, look, the reaction from the very beginning was that the British went completely berserk. I mean, really, the fact of the British control over this massive global criminal enterprise, and the idea that we made a direct link between the British royal family and this international drug apparatus drove them completely crazy. And basically they wanted blood. From the very outset, the British response was to go after Lyndon LaRouche as the person who commissioned this study and was the intellectual guide behind the whole effort. They basically decided that LaRouche was an enemy who had to be disposed of. And so what began in 1979 was a brutal campaign of vilification, slander, attempted assassinations, ultimately a political frame-up and a jailing of LaRouche and quite a number of his associates. They were committed to the idea that they were going to put all of their various resources at the disposal of destroying LaRouche and shutting him down. Ironically, as they did this, because we didn't fold our tents and we pushed back, they wound up exposing their hands even more so. You know, at the very outset, it was all kind of obvious and transparent. In New York City, you had a prominent mob attorney named Roy Cohen, who was the point person initially for a slander campaign against LaRouche that came directly down from the top, orders from London, run through conduits like the New York Times, but Cohen was the point person, and they picked up a bunch of real nasty smear characters, Dennis King and others like that. And then the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, a long-standing British asset of the City of London Zionist apparatus, they got into the act and started a major campaign of slander. At a certain point in the mid-1980s, they had Henry Kissinger deeply involved, basically pressuring for a corrupt FBI investigation into LaRouche. You had elements of the National Security Council, the neoconservatives. At one point, the British tapped into Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the head of the Soviet Union after the death of Andropov. And he demanded LaRouche's scalp. He so much as came out and said LaRouche should be murdered for the kinds of things that he's doing. And in every one of these instances, we looked back and tracked out the point of origin of all of these attacks to the British monarchy, to the structures of power in Britain. And, you know, I mean, at one point there was a very funny segment on the TV show Saturday Night Live, where they were, you know, both ridiculing but also exposing. You know, LaRouche says that the Queen pushes dope. Well, you know, we were never implying that Queen Elizabeth II goes out onto the street in front of Buckingham Palace with, you know, nickel bags and tries to, you know, sell drugs on the street. But the fact of the matter is that the British East India Company, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, all of these entities that made up the very heart of the global dope trade were royal chartered operations. So in that sense, yes, the Queen does push dope. She is at the center of a power structure of a British Empire that has used opium as a form of warfare against humanity and civilization for the last several hundred years. So they don't like him. And they thought that they would eliminate the LaRouche factor and that this would contribute to their own ability to survive. Well, Mr. LaRouche is 88 years old. He's still around. And now we see the specter of the core banks of the British financial oligarchy going through their death throes. So it's a nice moment for Dope Inc. to be back out in print again, and it's one of these things that I think really is a must-read for anybody who wants to understand all of the crises and problems that have beset the world over the last several hundred years, and to hone in on understanding why it is that the United States economy has been destroyed and why we're facing the potential of a full-scale dark age. You've got to read Dope Inc. in order to understand why and how it happened, and also to understand what weapons humanity has to defeat this enemy and to do it in the immediate weeks and months ahead.
NoSpinRootSource.com